I know Sixers fans kind of live in their own world at this point in time, separated from most of the rest of the NBA. And they feel in a lot of ways that they have no choice but to believe. They have no choice but to trust the process. Because otherwise, how could you sit there and stomach what the Philadelphia 76ers are doing as an organization? And the Sixers fans, I think, understand that all the way is the only way to go. You either are a championship contending team or you completely suck ass with the hope that you could find those star players in the draft, save the organization money, have those players in the fold for a few years, build yourself up into a championship contender so that way when that time comes, you have these young stars that are still waiting to enter the peak of their careers that you get at a cheaper price than if you had to bring them in via free agency. You've saved a lot of money as an organization, so that way you could go and add some pieces via free agency and be that championship contender. So Sixers fans have no choice, they feel, but to hashtag trust the process. But I'm here to tell you, you have no real reason to trust the process. And the reason being is that Sam Hinkie is an idiot, plain and simple. Again, I understand the approach and the philosophy to a degree. Is that if you're going to toil away as a 6, 7, or 8 seed in the playoffs every year just to get eliminated early on, you're not getting anywhere. You're good enough to think you're better than you really are, but you're not really good enough to really matter or be relevant or anywhere close to being a championship contending team. All the while, year after year, you miss out on potentially premium prospects. And when that floor does eventually cave in and the bottom falls out from under you, which it eventually always does, it's going to hurt your organization much worse than if you go ahead and kick off the rebuilding process right now. And for the Philadelphia 76ers fan base, they've come up with this thing, trust the process. And the process is a fourfold strategy. Number one is to tank. Is to tank for several years. All the while trying to accumulate as much draft pick currency and commodities as the organization possibly can for the short and long term. Taking much of that draft pick currency and commodities and plugging them into those draft and stash type of international players that you can take now as kind of like a hedge bet that in 2, 3, 4 years, these guys will develop overseas. You allow somebody else to spend their money, energies, and efforts developing these talents. And that way, when these guys are ready to play at a certain level at the NBA, when they've reached maybe closer to the peak of their skills as a basketball player, then you can bring them over. You get maximum reward for minimum risk and minimum time and energy, effort, and money invested into them. And all the while, this is a process about biding time until it's time. When you go through a full and complete top-down, bottom-up rebuild, it takes time. It takes years. And these steps along the way are ultimately designed to bide an organization's time until it's time. And I see this in play when it comes to my Chicago Cubs. They're in year 4 of the plan. They're not a championship contender yet, but they are a playoff contender, and they are starting to build themselves into a championship contender. But this is what the Cubs did. They tanked. They sat there and tried to rebuild their organization from the bottom up. They went and they invested heavily in the draft, both in terms of draft picks and on the international market. And the organization is starting to reap some of the benefits and the rewards from doing so. And what it did was it allowed them to bide their time until it was time, because the Cubs for so many years were a mediocre team that thought they were better than they really were, but they were just at a certain point where they would never entertain fully tanking. They'd spend too much money on old, overrated players and so on and so forth. So as a fan of a team that has been going through this process for the past few years, I understand the optimism that can potentially come along with it long term. It can test your patience. It can be a bit trying. But I understand those payoffs are potentially there, and when they are there, they start to feel really, really good. I also understand as a Chicago Bears fan, when a team foolishly believes that they are better than they are, and they continue to want to be stuck in that cycle of perpetual mediocrity and never acknowledge that they're not close to a championship contending team and that they need to tank in order to fully and completely rebuild the operation. So I understand again why the Sixers fans and organizations fans want to believe in this and hope this is the way to go, because they saw for so many years that the way the Sixers were doing business just ultimately wasn't accomplishing anything. But again, while it sounds great in theory and it sounds great in concept, it doesn't overcome the fact that Sam Hinkie is an idiot. And here's the problem. We'll start off with the flaws in this process that so many of you as Sixers fans have chosen to trust because, again, you really have no other choice. Tanking in the NBA is no guarantee of the number one overall pick, as you Sixers fans have found out the past two drafts, haven't you? In the NFL, your draft position is strictly based off of your regular season record, and that's it. So if you tank and lose the most games, you will be guaranteed to have the number one pick. In basketball, you have this thing called the NBA lottery. You could lose 10 more games than anybody else in the National Basketball Association. But if those ping pong balls don't go right for you, you could be picking third or fourth every single year. And you look at the last 2 years, the Sixers have had the third overall pick when they have clearly tried to tank in order to get the number one overall pick. And the safest bet to get a marquee talent is to have that number one overall pick because you ultimately dictate the terms of the draft and you control everything. That's the first flaw in the process. The next flaw in this process is a huge one. It's this whole notion that drafting and stashing is the way to go and that international players are the way of the future. They're not. International players are proven in the NBA not to be championship building blocks. And when you look at the current NBA and the top flight teams in the NBA, the majority of them are built around American-born, American-drafted players. It's not these draft and stash guys. Those draft and stash guys are role players. And if your whole process is in part largely built around the concept of drafting for role players, it's a very flawed process, is it not? You also look at the Philadelphia 76ers and a lot of the draft pick currency and commodities that they've accumulated and continue to accumulate are largely second-round picks. NBA champions and championship contending teams are not built through second-round picks. They are built through first-round picks and primarily first-round picks that are American-born players that play in America. That's not a pro-American anti-worldview. This is just statistical facts. And this whole notion that you could just flip the switch is completely and totally ridiculous. The NBA does not operate like the NFL and most certainly doesn't like Major League Baseball. In the NBA especially, the way an organization treats its players, treats its talent, can be a big hindrance or a big help when it comes to having to go out and get guys on the free agent market. No matter how much money you throw at somebody, part of the problem is, one, a lot of these players can re-sign with their current teams for more money, and number two, with all things being the same, if they're going to get the same money from you, but they can get it from somebody else, they'll look at that other organization and see that they've treated their players better and they treat their talent better, and they're going to go there. You can't just flip the switch, especially when you're basically treating this like this is a venture capital type of opportunity. And this brings me to Sam Hinkie. He is an idiot. He is not an idiot in the sense from an intelligence standpoint. He's an idiot from a basketball executive standpoint. I don't understand how a guy that used to work for Bain Capital has been given the keys to an NBA organization with no real track record of proven results at all on his end before the age of fucking 40. And what is even more astounding to me is the fact that so many Sixers fans and people within the NBA actually try to justify what this guy is doing, try to excuse it, and try to say that in any way, shape, or form, this is some proven model for freaking success. This is a guy that comes from the Daryl Morey executive tree, and Morey's a freaking idiot. But at least Morey has built a playoff contender in Houston. But this is the guy that you brought in to rebuild your organization. A guy that worked under Daryl Morey. Frankly, what the fuck has Daryl Morey ever done? And then you got Sam Hinkie, like Daryl Morey. They're very big on analytics and all of this. And while that's a great philosophy to have, maybe when it comes to sabermetrics and the money ball in baseball, and you see analytics growing in importance in the NFL, analytics don't always seem to work so well in the NBA, and most especially have been proven not to be that great of a deal of importance to the NBA currently. And most especially of all, what is astounding to me is for somebody that is so much about analytics, meaning looking at statistical figures and looking at probabilities and all of these different things, he clearly doesn't fucking understand the NBA of today and the direction of the NBA going forward. How can you be an analytical mind when you don't have the basketball brain power to be able to analyze what the fuck is the NBA reality and is going to continue to be the NBA reality? It makes absolutely no sense. But again, that's because Sam Hinkie is a fucking idiot. He came from Daryl Morey. But this is the guy that you entrust with your organization. Somebody that used to work for Bain Capital. And now he's the guy. In a lot of ways, he's treating this like he's a hedge fund manager or like a venture capitalist. He's coming in, he's turning shit over, he's getting rid of pieces, he's adding cheaper, low cost, lower risk, potentially higher reward pieces with the foolish hope that maybe they pan out, but if they don't, he saved the company overall bottom line, and as a result, he's basically come in and helped them turn a big profit. A lot of times you would see somebody come in like this as part of a process for a company merger or an acquisition or a company being sold or whatever the case might be. But this is the type of philosophy that the Philadelphia 76ers are putting in place under Sam Hinkie. They're running it like it's a venture capitalist type of opportunity, a hedge fund type of thing. No, it's a fucking basketball team in a professional basketball league. But when you talk about the stupidity of the Philadelphia 76ers and just how much of an idiot Sam Hinkie is, you have to look no further than the way he has conducted and constructed his organization's NBA drafts over the past 3 years and the different moves that he's made. Let's look at 2013. He trades away an all-star point guard in Drew Holiday for a 6'11", 190-pound injured center who missed all of his rookie season in Nerlens Noel. In a game that is evolving more and more towards being a point guard and perimeter-driven league, of course, Sam Hinkie, in all of his great analytical genius, decides to take a 190, 195-pound center with a torn ACL with no offensive skill, number 6 overall, trading away an all-star talent type of point guard in a Drew Holiday. Then he takes a Michael Carter-Williams, only to trade him away the next season, and ends up acquiring an Arsalan Kazemi, the first Iranian-born player ever drafted in the NBA, who, of course, is playing overseas. Then we look at 2014. It's the second draft. Now you start to take that next step in the process. Well, what happens as a result? Sam Hinkie decides that he's going to go down the big man route yet again and take yet another center with an injury, yet another center with an injury that will cost him his rookie season in Joel Embiid. It's one thing to take a 195-pound center with a torn ACL. Now you're taking another big man who plays the exact same position the second year in a row, and you're taking one with foot problems. Because you want a big man with foot problems in the NBA, right? And Joel Embiid, of course, didn't play his rookie season and may not play in his second season in the NBA because Sam Hinkie is an idiot. And then he drafts a guy like Elfrid Payton only to turn around and trade him to the Orlando Magic for the draft rights to Dario Saric, another international player that is still playing overseas and is at least another season or two away from coming over to the States. In the second round, he drafts KJ McDaniels only to trade him in his rookie season to the Houston Rockets. He takes another guy in Jeremy Grant, a role player at the NBA level, Jordan McRae, a MBDL role player, and then Vasilije Micic, another draft and stash guy who won't contribute anything for a couple of years, if at all. All right. At this point in time, you have to really start wondering what the process is and what the philosophy is and what the strategy is and if there is a real strategy. In 2 straight drafts, in a game, again, that is increasingly evolving into being a point guard and perimeter wing-dominated league, he's taking centers. He takes one center that's 195 pounds with a torn ACL with no offensive skill and then follows that up with a 7-foot center with a foot problem that causes him to miss his entire rookie year. And all the while, his other first-round pick ends up being a guy that he drafts and stashes for a couple of seasons. Because so often these guys end up panning out, right? So even just in his first 2 drafts, you've traded away Michael Carter-Williams and KJ McDaniels. You've gotten nothing out of Joel Embiid. You've got nothing out of Kazemi, Saric, Mitchich. You've got nothing out of any of these guys except Nerlens Noel. But Sixers fans should continue to trust the process, right? So let's look at 2015. And maybe to be fair to Sam Hinkie, he wanted D'Angelo Russell. Maybe to be fair to Sam Hinkie, he didn't expect D'Angelo Russell to go number 2 to the Lakers. Well, he did. So at that point in time, he's sitting there with the 3rd overall pick in the draft. You still have a point guard like Emmanuel Mudiay, who could be a franchise player at the NBA level. You have a wing player like a Justice Winslow, who for my money could be a franchise player at the NBA level. So instead of Sam Hinkie doing that, he decides for the 3rd consecutive year to invest a top pick in the NBA draft into a center. At least this time a center who looks like, at least at the moment, that he'll actually play as a freaking rookie. But he takes another center, this time in Jahlil Okafor. And then in the 2nd round, 3 of his 5 picks are draft and stash guys, one of whom he traded away to the Knicks for 2 future 2nd round picks years down the freaking road. And then takes guys like Richaun Holmes and J.P. Takoto. This is the master plan. At a time where the league is evolving and changing by the minute into a guard and perimeter wing-dominated league, this stupid son of a bitch is drafting like it's the fucking 1980s. What type of analytical model could he possibly be using that in any way, shape, or form indicates that his strategy is any fucking good at all? Best player available, my fucking ass. It's ridiculous. 3 straight years of drafting a player that plays the same position. And this whole notion of, well, you could potentially take one of those and you could flip them off into something else. Okay, so what? Just so that way at some point in time you'll take another center, this time a drafted stash guy? 3 straight years he spent a 1st round pick on a center. A center. A no offense having Nerlens Noel with a previously torn ACL. A Joel Embiid with foot problems so bad he might miss a 2nd consecutive season. And a Jahlil Okafor with tremendous offensive game and absolutely 0 defensive game. This is the guy that you're supposed to trust. This is the process you're supposed to trust, Sixers fans. If he's using analytics, these analytics should be banned forever. Because only the biggest of idiots thinks that drafting like it's the 1980s is the fucking way to go. This reminds me of goddamn Jerry Krause. Every year he would draft a damn power forward. You're just getting a diminishing return because you're investing too much into one position, all the while creating yourself an imbalanced roster. And this whole notion of, well, you could take guys and flip them at some point in time. They still got to play. They still got to be able to have time to develop. They got to be able to show something. And if they're sharing playing time with these other guys, they're not going to be able to do it to the point where you can get the type of commodities and currency and draft picks in return that you would expect and that you should. You look at the modern NBA. Look at the last 8 teams that survived in the playoffs. The Golden State Warriors, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, the Houston Rockets, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Chicago Bulls, the Washington Wizards, the LA Clippers. With the exception of the Memphis Grizzlies, every single team on here, their 1st and 2nd best player are Americans. Their 1st and 2nd best player are Americans. In the case of Golden State, basically all their top players are American. Especially when it comes to the stars. Including a guy like Finals MVP Andre Iguodala, who, by the way, was a former 1st round pick of the Philadelphia 76ers. The Cleveland Cavaliers, LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love. The Atlanta Hawks, Al Horford, Paul Millsap, Jeff Teague, Kyle Korver. Houston Rockets, James Harden, Dwight Howard. The Memphis Grizzlies, yeah, they got Marc Gasol, but they've also got Zach Randolph and Mike Conley. The Chicago Bulls, Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler. You can throw in Paul Gasol, yes, but they're probably 3rd best player. The Washington Wizards, John Wall, Bradley Beal. You want to throw Gortat again, probably their 3rd best player, the Clippers. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan. Notice a couple of themes there. All of these teams, with the exception of maybe Memphis, are perimeter and guard-dominated teams. Yet the Philadelphia 76ers are trying to build themselves around international draft and staff talents Even though most of those guys never become stars, and the top 8 teams in the NBA, for the most part, outside of the fucking Gasols, prove this point for me 100 times over. And then they're sitting there building themselves around damn centers. Again, it's not the 1980s. You don't have to have a great or even very good center in order to win an NBA championship. For Christ's sakes, when the Warriors really got going in the NBA Finals, it's when they went to a lineup that had a 6'7" Draymond Green lined up at the 5 position. The way you build your teams to be champions in the NBA are through a combination of first-round picks, free agency, and trades. Instead, what the Philadelphia 76ers try to do is build themselves with no free agency, with trades to accumulate future draft picks that, for the most part, are second-round picks. Does anybody see the fucking problem here? And when we go beyond that, and we look at the draft philosophy of taking a center every freaking year, I don't want to hear that best player available shit. That means you don't know what the fuck you're doing. You look at teams that consistently find themselves in the same position in the draft lottery year in, year out. One of the common themes you would so often find is that these would be teams that would draft the same position every single year, or the same area each and every single year, and usually they would always miss on big men. They would draft big men every fucking year. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Draft a big man, still suck. Draft another big man, still suck. And do a year in and year out. A perfect example of this is the Golden State Warriors. When you look at the years leading up to when they drafted Steph Curry 7th overall in 2009 and really started to change the shape and dynamic of their organization. They took Andris Budrich, Ike Diagu, Patrick O'Brien, Anthony Randolph. So they're taking guys that play the same or similar positions and similar styles. These guys never develop, they never become any better, yet you're continuing to sink more and more expense into the same position, getting the same type of fucking result, all the while expecting the results to ever change, even though you're making the same mistakes over and over fucking again. And yet here we are, the Philadelphia 76ers, doing this exact same shit. Building around big men, drafting a center every freaking year, and I'm supposed to buy that this is going to work? I'm supposed to buy that this is some part of a great master plan, or that this is some newfangled NBA analytics? It sounds like a bunch of dumb bullshit to me. A team that is 25, 30 years behind the goddamn times, building themselves in the exact opposite way that real contenders and real championship teams in the NBA are built today, as I have outlined in this video. And for those of you that want to still trust the process, and you look at the draft pick currency that's been accumulated, oh boy, they could have potentially 4 first-round picks in 2016. Yes, a draft class that doesn't look all that good to begin with. That's the draft to have 4 first-round picks in. But then let's look at it. They got a Lakers pick that is top 3 protected. We'll assume that they'll get that pick, which might be somewhere in the 8 to 12 range. They've got Miami's pick that, again, will be top 10 protected. And you would have to assume if they could stay healthy and bring back everybody that they need to, the Heat might be a playoff team next year, so they'll probably get that pick. So you're looking at a pick somewhere between 8 to 12, then another pick probably somewhere in the 13 to 17 range. Then they get Oklahoma City's pick, which is top 15 protected. Okay, so another pick that OKC might be a playoff team. Maybe you get the pick somewhere between 16 to 20. And then you get a second-round pick from Denver. So you're looking at having the only pick that could potentially be a top 10 pick is your own damn pick, getting a Lakers pick, a Heat pick, and a Thunder pick, knowing that you're probably going to take 2 of those and invest them in international players again that won't contribute for 2 or 3 years, even though most championship contending teams in the NBA are built around American-born young stars that are 19, 20 years of age. You can have all these picks to you're blue in the face, but if you don't know what the hell you're doing with them, what the hell difference does it make? Doesn't matter how much draft pick currency you have. And based off of what you've seen out of Sam Hinkie so far, he's not a very good drafter. So what the hell makes you think that this draft pick currency is going to matter? He's acquired all of these picks that aren't going to be premium, that aren't going to be all that particularly good. Then you look at 2017. He has no additional picks. 2018. He's got the right to swap picks with Brooklyn or Cleveland, whoever's second-round pick is better. The Clippers or the Knicks, whoever's second-round pick is better. He's got the right to swap second-round picks with Brooklyn in 2020. He's got the Knicks second-round pick in 2019 and 2021. So you've got a couple of first-round picks and a bunch of second-round picks, and more so, just the right to swap second-round picks with these teams, some of whom will probably be better than the Sixers by that time, so they won't even have the right to swap the damn picks. This is the process that Sixers fans are trusting. This is the trust the process that the Sixers fans are sitting there and putting out there like this is some type of golden ticket to the promised land. No, this is the golden ticket to years of fucking wasted time and being made to look like jackasses. Jackasses. You've got an imbalanced roster that lacks in talent in pretty much everywhere else except for center, at which you have a limited one-dimensional 195-pound, maybe 205-pound now center in Nerlens Noel, whose flexibility to be able to play the four would be questionable at best. A Jahlil Okafor, an old-school type of offensive big man who can't play defense or rebound or block shots, really worth a lick. A Joel Embiid, who's Sam Bowie-like and Greg Oden-like in his injuries, and that's not a category or territory you want to be having your name mentioned in. All the while, there's no future at point guard. There's nothing at the 2. There's nothing at the 3. There's nothing at the 4. Nobody's going to want to come and play for this fucking team that freaking matters, that would help turn shit around. You've invested all of these picks in overseas players that are going to be years away from contributing, and all the while aren't going to get you any closer to being a championship team. Because again, the simple fact of the matter is, when you look at the top teams in the NBA, the last 8 teams in the playoffs, with the exception of Memphis, every team's best player and even second best player was an American-born player. The guy that was drafted and came in and played right away. In a lot of these cases, these were players that were originally drafted by the team. Golden State, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Harrison Barnes, Draymond Green, Cleveland Cavaliers. LeBron came back via free agency, but originally their pick. Kyrie Irving, their pick. They utilized Andrew Wiggins and Anthony Bennett as commodities, as currency to go out and get a guy like Kevin Love. So they used their draft picks, the Cleveland Cavaliers did, to get another star in Kevin Love. You look at Atlanta, they drafted a guy like Al Horford and Jeff Teague. They brought in guys like Korver via free agency and Millsap they brought in as well. But the Rockets, they were ones that went the trade and free agent route. But they still had other pieces in place they brought in through the draft. It's just the whole notion that you build your team through international second-round picks without utilizing free agency at all, and not using trades at any point in time to bring in any type of veteran or star presence is absolutely ridiculous. You're in year number 3 of this process, and absolutely no progression has been made. You can't even look at the Philadelphia 76ers roster right now and say, well, they got this, and they got this, they got this. It's going to take time, but I can see the positivity. I can see the steps being made. I can see the progress that's there short-term and long-term. There's none of that. Sixers fans, stop trusting in the process. Because your chieftain, so to speak, is just the leader of the village of idiots. Sam Hinkie is an idiot. And if you can't see that by now, I don't know how the hell you're ever going to be convinced otherwise. Do you need another 3-5 years for this point to be proven? He's a moron. He's an idiot. And the Sixers, if they have any chance of really being rebuilt, they need an actual basketball person running the show. It's one thing if it's somebody like a Jerry West is doing this. Jerry West has a lot of championship hardware to his resume to sit there and say he knows what the hell he's doing. Sam Hinkie doesn't have any of that. And based off of what he's done and the exact opposite direction he's going compared to the current trends of the NBA, I'd say his analytical model is flawed. It is broken. He's in over his head. And he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Sam Hinkie is an idiot. Stop believing this jackass shit.